Hi, I'm Steve Coppard and welcome to Brewday. Just going to run you guys through a beer I'm going to make today. It's an all-grain beer. I'm using malted barley that's been crushed. I'm using hop pellets, and I'm using liquid yeast and just water, and show you the process, how it all works. Some of you guys have said you're interested, so here's a quick video. Cheers. Okay guys, I'll give you a quick overview of the brewery. So I have a three-tier gravity-fed single infusion type brewery. So at the top here I have a hot liquor tank, which is for heating and treatment of brewing water. I have a mash tun, lauter tun, for mashing the grain and separating it from the wort or the sugary, watery, malty water. And then we have a brew kettle down here. These are all fired by gas, and as I move around, you see I've got a couple of gas bottles, one for the kettle and one for the hot liquor tank. So I've just started the process. I've got about 20 litres of water that's under heat here. I'm going to raise that water to 80 degrees. As soon as we hit 80 degrees, I'll be running it off into this mash tun and mixing it with the grain and doing the mash process. So as we go through, I'll show you guys how it all works, and welcome to brewing. On the side of this hot liquor tank that I've got a sight gauge that's just made up out of a John Guest plumbing fitting and some food grade plastic hose that I've put some graduation marks on the side of the keg. This piece of aluminium paper here is just to diffuse the heat, because there's a lot of flames going on under there, and the heat can run up the side of the keg and melt those plastic fittings. So that's just a little tip. Mash tun, no real reason to have any sight gauge there, but on the kettle again we've got another sight gauge, and this thing inside the kettle is my immersion coil, which I will use later. You'll see that in the bottom of the kettle and the mash tun I've got a perforated false bottom, and I've got a siphon tube that runs out to a ball valve, which is makes transferring the liquids very easy. Okay, so I'm making a couple of beers today. I've got a couple of bags of grain down here, and in each bag we call this a grain bill, and it's basically a bunch of different types of grain that are crushed and put in a bag, and we'll put those into the mash tun later. These little green bags here, these guys are called hops. These are hop pellets of various different varieties. And in terms of yeast, I use liquid yeast. Got a couple here, which is a 1968. It's an English ale yeast, and quite a cool pack. Basically, there's 100 billion yeast cells inside each pack, and you just smack the pack with your hand, and it bursts the little bubble inside with the yeast in it, and there's a bunch of nutrients. Starts the process off of the yeast actually cultivating and growing. So this bag, over the next 3 hours, it looks pretty thin now. You'll see in 3 hours time it'll be quite fat, and there'll be a lot more yeast cells in there that are ready to go for the fermentation. So those are the raw ingredients. There ain't no preservatives or anything strange here. It's just, it's crushed grain. You can probably see through the bag. These grains aren't ground to dust. They're basically just smashed a little so that when the water strikes the grain seeds, that it gets into the endosperm of each husk, and that's where the sugar is that can be converted. So that's a little bit about the ingredients, and the next step, we'll put this grain here into the mash tun and mix it with hot water at a special temperature, and we'll go from there. Okay, as you can see, my 20 litres of hot water in this hot liquor tank is up to 80 degrees, so now it's time for the next process. Okay, to get the hot water from there into here, I've made up these copper siphoning tubes. So as you can see here, I've just got a copper tube that, is going to siphon all of that water out of that hot liquor tank. So here goes. Okay, we're just going to crank this tap now and run this hot water into the mash tun. There she goes. So that's 80-degree water, and what we're trying to achieve here is that the keg is going to take a bit of heat out of that water, and then I'm going to insulate the keg with a jacket, and when it's at the right strike heat we'll add the grain, and it'll sit there for 90 minutes, and this hot water is going to convert that starch inside the endosperms of those husks to maltose and dextrose, which are the two convertible sugars. And if we get that mix right at the right temperature, we'll end up with the right outcome. Okay, so we've put 20 litres into this mash tun. There's a little trick in getting the right amount of hot water to the right amount of grain, so that the actual consistency of the mash is right for the right conversion. And now we need to insulate this keg and move to the next step. Okay, you'll see that I've added an insulation jacket to the mash tun, and this is so that we can keep that heat in the water and in the grain when the conversion is taking place. And you'll see here we're down to about 76, and that's about the right, what's called the strike heat, to add the grain to the water, because it's going to drop another few degrees. We want to try and keep the grain between 66 and 68 degrees for 90 minutes while that sugar conversion takes place. So I'm going to take the lid off now and add the grain, and you'll see what all that's about. Okay, I've just added all of this grain to the hot water, just mixing it through to make sure there's no dry spots. And then we're going to put the lid on this, and we're going to leave it for about 90 minutes, and that hot water is going to convert the fermentable sugars in the malt into what we call wort or wort, which is basically just malty water, and it's going to taste real good. So on with the next step. Okay, you can see I've put the lid back on, and I've got some good insulation here, and just put this final jacket on the top. Now that keg is fully insulated. This jacket I just made up with some hot water cylinder insulation, and I tried my skills at sewing and made up a nice jacket for it. So here we can see we're just under 70, and that'll settle out to about, I want 68 ideally, and that'll drop to about 66 over 90 minutes. Okay, we're about 1 hour 15 into the mash, and I'm still showing a good 68 degrees here, so that's good. I don't know if you can quite see this, but there is a saccharification scale which reads from dry at the low end at about 60 degrees through medium at about 65 and full body up to 71 degrees. And because I'm brewing an English style extra strong bitter, what I'm looking for is definitely the full body, and the mash temperature determines the saccharification. So when we're mashing, we're actually converting two types of sugar. We're converting maltose, which is the full body stuff, and dextrose, which is the thinner, more alcoholic and fermentable stuff. So this looks to be bang on. I'm going to start heating up what's called some sparge water now, and I'll show you the next process, which is sparging. So I need to get this guy on with another 20 litres of water, and I'll be back soon. Okay, we're at the end of the mash, and you can see I have a perfect balance of saccharification here. So it's going to be a full-bodied and equally alcoholic great beer. Okay, I've got 20 litres in the hot liquor tank that I'm going to use for a thing called sparging. And as you can see, I've almost got the heat up to the sparging temperature, which is just under 80 degrees. 78 degrees. So nearly time to turn off this heat under here and start the lautering and sparging process. Lautering means separating the grain from the wort or the malty sugary water that's in this mash tun, and we're going to run that off into the boil kettle. So let's start that process. Okay, we've finished our mash. So the hot water should have converted all of the grain to the starch to sugar. Now we need to run it off into this kettle down below. One small trick is to get this running bright, as they say in brewing terms, which obviously in this mash tun there's lots of husks and bits of chunky stuff that we don't want to have run through to the boil kettle, because it will it creates some bad flavours. It's full of tannins and stuff. So what we'll do is we'll run off some of this into a jug, and we'll recirculate it gently through this mash grain bed until the liquid we're getting out is nice and clear and bright. So let's do that. Okay, so I just have a jug in here in the kettle. I'm going to open up the crank open this tap here on the mash tun and just collect the first bit of turbid wort. You'll see this in a second. Okay, we're just collecting a jug of these first runnings, and I'll show you. Here is the first runnings that have come out of the mash tun, and you can see there's lots of debris and stuff floating around in that, which we don't want going through to the boil kettle. So I'm just going to gently put this back on top of the grain bed. And I'm going to do this a few times until it's running nice and clear. You can see that gungy stuff coming out. I want to try and do this as gently as you can. You see all that stuff in there? Right, we're going to do this again until it's nice and clear. Okay, that's looking much brighter now. There's no gunge in it. So now we're going to start the lauter sparging process. Okay, now I'm going to attach my sparger. Now you can see here this attaches to the hot liquor tank, and underneath it's basically a manifold, and there's tons of tiny little holes here. This is just going to create a gentle rain over the top of the grain bed. So I'm going to attach this now and show you how it works. Okay, you can see I've attached the sparger, which is sitting over the mash, connected to my hot liquor tank with 20 litres of water at about 78 degrees. So what this is going to do, it's going to, as I run the wort into the boil kettle slowly, this is going to wash all of the grain and get the residual sugars out of the grain that are left behind, so that we get as much efficiency out of our grain as we can, because we want as much of the good stuff to reach the boil kettle down below. So I'm just going to crank this tap here, and you'll see how it works. You want to do this gently, slowly. Okay, there she goes. Now at the same time I'm going to crank this handle down here. I'm going to try and keep a little bit of liquid above the grain, but as it all runs through, it's going to wash all of that good sugar out of the remaining spent grain. So here goes. Open this tap now. We want the outflow of this to be about the same as the inflow from this. So I'm just going to ease back on this slightly. Here we go. Might take 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to get all that good sugar out of that grain and into our brew kettle. And that's looking about perfect. We've got about a centimetre of water over the top of the grain bed. This is called fly mashing, as opposed to draining all of the wort out of the mash tun and then rinsing it. This method basically just leaches all of the sugars out of the grain slowly through the grain bed, and as you can see down here, we've got a good steady stream of clear wort coming into a brew kettle, which I'm going to fire up now. So we need to get this up to the boil before the next stage of the process, which is adding hops. So one thing to note here, obviously we've got about 6 kilos of grain in here, and when that stuff gets wet it's going to retain a lot of water, and we need to get around 30 litres of boilable in the kettle. So that's why I've got 20 litres up in this hot liquor tank. So the 20 here plus the at least 10 litres of good stuff out of here is going to end up as 30 litres in here, and then after we've boiled it we're going to evaporate a lot off the steam, and we're going to end up with 25 litres of fermentable hopped beer. Alrighty, so you can see I've collected around about collected more than 30 litres, so I'm going to boil that until I'm down to, I don't know, around 25 I guess. It's probably collected a bit too much, but it'll be okay because it's quite a high gravity beer, so it'll be pokey enough. So we're on the boil now. I'll disconnect this guy and we'll put the lid on and we'll get the boil underway. We're at about 70, coming up 70 degrees, so it's going to take a good 30 minutes to come to the boil, and then we can start adding the hops. Okay, while the wort is coming up to the boil, we need to get out our hops. Now, there's several types of hops in this recipe. Hops fall into two categories, basically bittering hops, the ones that make the beer bitter and balance the sweetness of the malt, and the other type are aroma hops. So at boil stage we want to put in these bittering hops, so it requires 15 grams of Challenger hops and 10 grams of Target hops. So we need to measure those out on our scales here and pop them into a hop bag, which I have over here, and then those guys will go into the boil for 60 minutes. About 15 minutes from the end we're going to put in another two types of hop, which are going to give the beer some aroma and a little more flavour, so we'll get back to that later, but for now we'll measure out these puppies. So in this hop sock here we have our 25 grams of first initial stage boiling hops, and they'll go in as soon as we've got a good rolling boil going, and these are going to imply bitterness to the beer and balance all that really strong, sweet, tasty, malty stuff, so we have a nice balanced beer. Okay, we're showing 100 on our brew kettle, and got the start of a rolling boil in there going, so it's time to add our hops. So in they go. Let's push those hops down into the beer. See, we've got a boil going here, and they're going to be in there for 60 minutes. Going to impart bitterness to the beer. Here's our second edition of hops, so some North Down and East Kent Goldings. They're going to go in 15 minutes from the end, so I've just weighed those out. Looks like a kind of bit of drug dealing, but it's all good, it's just beer. You can see here we've got a good rolling boil in the kettle, and the green hops are being infused into that malty sweetness, which is what we want. Okay, I'm reaching the end of the boil, so beyond the boil, sanitation is your friend. So in this container I have some sterilizing agent with a bunch of anything that comes into contact with the beer after it's reached room temperature when we're pitching yeast and stuff. So things like funnels, things like siphoning tubes, anything that comes into contact with beer once it's ready to ferment, because any bacteria at that point will go straight into the fermenter and you don't want that. So cleanliness is next to godliness when it comes to brewing. Outside here I have a 25 litre fermenter which I've already cleaned with bleach to get rid of the old yucky yeast from last time, and running some more Sandstar through it as well. Yeah, you gotta keep the stuff clean, otherwise you'll have problems. Okay, we're at the 1 hour 15 mark with the boil now, so it's time to add our last addition of hops. In they go. I'll push those down in a minute. Okay, we're about 10 minutes out from the end of the boil, and I've just dropped the copper immersion coil into the kettle. That's to sterilise it. And then once we turn off the gas and the flame goes out, we'll start running water slowly through this, and it will go in one end and through the coil and out to the drain outside, and it'll cool this boiling hot hopped wort down to about 18 degrees, and then we can run that off into the fermenter and pitch the yeast. As you can see, after about 3 hours this bag has swollen up, which means the yeast is working inside the pack. Give it a few shakes from time to time. So once we've got the fermentable beer down to a pitchable temperature, we will sanitize this pack and then open it up and pour it into the fermenter with the final beer, and it'll be on its way. Okay, we have the cold water running through the immersion chiller and the hot water going back outside, and you'll see quite quickly the temperature will drop. So it's dropped 5 degrees already in the first few minutes, and we want to get that down to about 20 degrees. It's about this time of the day when you're brewing and everything is at a safe temperature that you should reward yourself with the labours of your effort. Here is my converted beer fridge. I've got a CO2 cylinder down here, and connected to that I have inside my fridge a couple of 20 litre kegs, and dispensing out to a couple of these fine beer taps. And I don't know how I'm going to pour this and film it at the same time, but let's go. Let's give it a try. Ooh, this ain't going to work. Hang on. Oh, there she goes. I'm going to put this phone down and fill this up, but you can see that there is the labour of my love. Perfect. Perfect, perfect beer. So there you have it. Okay, we now have the fermentable beer down to just over 20 degrees, so it's time to transfer it to this fermenter and pitch the yeast. Okay, here she goes. Okay, I've collected about 27 litres, and in goes the yeast. Last thing we do is we just close that fermenter down tight, fit the airlock with some liquid in, and we're good to go. So this will brew away for about 7 days, and then we'll do the next bit. Okay, so a few of you are probably wondering, how do you know how strong your beer is? So this device here is called a hydrometer, and that's a trial jar, and that's some beer that's cooled now straight out of the boiler, When I drop this in here and give it a spin, it settles out at a reading, which I made was 1050. So depending on that's what's called the original gravity. When the fermentation is finished, some of the sugars will be unfermentable, and I'll come out with a reading like 1013 or something. So I can subtract one from the other and do a calculation, and it'll tell me that this is about 5.5%. So that's how we figure that stuff out. And there we have it, the end of a day's brewing. Did 2 beers today. Did the Fuller's ESB, which is their extra special bitter, and a London Porter. So I've got about 28 litres here, and I've got about 25 litres there. So it should all be ready in about 3 to 4 weeks.